Hello everyone, how's it going? Uh, so if you haven't already, what we're going to be doing tonight is just going through a sample, just some sample questions, touching on a lot of different things that we've talked about in the instrument ground class. FAA test questions are pretty typical FAA test questions. Uh, there looks to be about a 5 to 6 second lag time between when I pop up a question and when you guys get to see it, so I'll try to take that into account. But what we're going to have here is on the right side of your screen, the question is going to pop up, and then if you're logged in on another device to the uh, session, let me just check the session ID, 73426923734269223. Let me just try to sign in once to make sure it's working here. If for some reason it's not, I'll just restart it. Just give me a second. Seven, 3, 2, 4, 6, 9, 2, 3. 3, 2, 4, 6, 9, 2, 3. All right. Okay. Yeah, I'm not sure. Code seems to be working. I was able to log in okay. If anybody's having trouble, uh, let me know. Oh, I put in 7342, not 7324. Sorry. Look at the session ID at the top of the screen there. Hey, Carl, how you doing? Uh, yeah, so the session ID should be at 73246923. And the page you should end up on, it should say at the top IPG4-hold-IAP, and it should have the code there waiting, telling you to wait for the first question, and then go next button. That if you try hitting the go next button, it shouldn't go anywhere. But anyway, I'm going to pop up the first question and we'll see how this goes. So, uh, and that's about how things go. All right, hang on a second. That's because I signed in with the other thing. Sorry about this. I signed in to check it out, so I'm going to have to start it over. So you're going to have to, I apologize, you're going to have to hit the quit button and then sign in again. This time the new session code is going to be 732481105. I'll give you guys a second to put that new one in. Sorry about that. Let me just pop up the first question to make sure it's going to work this time. There we go. So once you get logged in, you should be able to hit go to next, and it should pop up with a place to give your answer choice. David, how you doing? If you're able to play along with the question and answer thing, uh, just hit the, sign in page for the Max Q session. It's got the session code down there, the newest one, 73248105. Too much technology happening in close proximity here. Okay, going through the first question here, it says during a precision radar or ILS approach, the rate of descent required to remain on the glide slope will A, increase as the ground speed increases, decrease as the ground speed increases, or remain the same regardless of the ground speed. So hopefully you should be able to either just select your own best answer, or if you're playing along with the quiz thing, go ahead and select your best answer and click submit answer. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and click the answer button. Hopefully you got a chance to give it a shot there. All right, so I got some, Dan got the first correct answer. Thanks, good job, Dan. So during the ILS approach, the rate of descent required to remain on the glide slope. So as your ground speed increases, you are going, faster to the runway, which means you have to increase the rate of descent to stay on the glide path. The just because you're making more ground to the station, so therefore you got to be going down at a faster rate to stay on the same ramp as before. I'll go ahead and click on the next one here. So what does the symbol T within a black triangle in the minimum section of the instrument approach procedure for a particular airport indicate? Is it A, that takeoff minimums are 1 mile for aircraft having 2 engines or less than a half mile for those with more than 2 engines? Does it indicate B, takeoff minimums are not standard and or departure procedures are published? Or C, the instrument takeoffs are not authorized? Go ahead and take a second there and choose the best answer. While you're thinking about that one, just recall there's a rule of thumb for determining your descent rate necessary for a glide slope. You take your ground speed and multiply it by 5, and that will give you your approximate descent rate. So if you're going, you know, 90 knots, you multiply that by 5, you're going to need 450 feet per minute. You get 100 knots, you're going to need 500 feet per minute. So just to give you an idea how it goes, is a good rule of thumb to remember. For this one, recall that the T you'd find in the upper left-hand corner of the approach plate, and that should tell you to go to the departure minimums or the departure section in the terminal procedures publication for the airport, and that there are takeoff minimums are not standard or departure procedure is published for that airport. So we did a pretty good job there. Most people got that. Carl, good job getting the first one. First one to get that one in there. All right, we'll go on to the next question. So what are the main differences between a visual approach and a contact approach? Visual approach and a contact approach. Is it A, the pilot must request a contact approach. The pilot may be assigned a visual approach and higher weather minimums must exist. Is it B, anytime the pilot reports the field in sight, ATC may clear the pilot for a contact approach? Or is it C, the pilot must request a visual approach and report having the field in sight? ATC may assign a contact approach if VFR conditions exist. So go ahead and take a moment to select the best answer there. So I like to think of the contact approach as kind of like the IFR version of a special VFR clearance. It's something that you have to request. Contact approach, as I mentioned in class, can potentially save you, up to 20, 25 miles worth of flying. If you're, transiting, say south of an airport to start an approach from the east, and you get just south of the airport and you have visual contact with the ground, at least 1 mile visibility, and you can use ground reference to navigate yourself to the station. You can request a contact approach and make your way to the airport. The advantage here being though is that if for some reason you're not able to continue because of visibility or cloud or whatever other requirements, you still maintain your IFR clearance, so you can initiate a climb, get back with ATC, and go back and do the approach. A visual approach, however, you must have VFR conditions must exist, and the pilot has to report, having the airport in sight or traffic to follow. But if good visual conditions exist, air traffic control can initiate a clearance for a visual approach. So let's see how we did with this one. All right. So A is the best answer because the pilot must request a contact approach. And a pilot may be assigned a visual approach and higher weather minimums must exist. You got to have VFR weather conditions if you're going to be doing a visual approach. Good job there, Fly Guy. Yeah, that's no problem, David. Just follow along on your own there. This just kind of gives me an idea of areas where we're having trouble, so I can go over it in more detail. I'm going to go ahead and hit the next question here, and that is, we got figure 234 here. All right, so referring to figure 234, which is right next door for you there, it says if your aircraft was cleared for the ILS runway 18 approach at Lincoln Municipal and crossed the Lincoln VOR at 5,000 feet MSL, at what point in the teardrop could a descent to 3,200 feet commence? Is it as soon as intercepting localizer inbound, immediately, or only at the point authorized by ATC? So we are cleared for the approach, and we just crossed the Lincoln VOR at 5,000 feet. The question is, when can we go down to 3,200? I'm going to go ahead and zoom in a little bit there for you so you can see what's going on there. So just crossed the Lincoln VOR using the teardrop entry to get established. When can we start down to 3,200 feet? All right, I'm going to go ahead and click the answer there, and then we'll go over it. Oh, good job. Fly Guy answered that one right. Only 2 people answered it, which is okay. Let's talk about it here. So, looking at the instrument approach, we're starting here at the Lincoln VOR, and we're going to be heading out on the teardrop here. So outbound on the 321 radial off of the Lincoln VOR until we get to this intersection, which would be the 12 DME, or identifying that intersection via GPS, at which time we would start a right-hand turn to join the localizer path back inbound. So here on the profile view, you can see that after we cross the VOR heading outbound, we can start down immediately to 3,200 feet outbound. And then once we're established on the localizer inbound, then we can go down to 2,900 feet where we can catch the glide slope and follow that down. So once you're on a portion of the approach referenced by the thick black line, you follow the procedure as it's published there. And so outbound, it shows you go down to 3,200. Let's go on to the next question. So while being radar vectored, an approach clearance is received. The last assigned altitude should be maintained until when? Until we are established on a segment of a published route or instrument approach procedure, reaching the final approach fix, or until we're advised to begin our descent. So go ahead and take some time with that, and I'll give you a few seconds to have a chance to look at that. Okay, so we'll go ahead and click the answer here and see what we got. All right, so the correct answer is established on a segment of a published route or instrument approach procedure. Kind of the same idea as the last question. Once we've crossed the initial approach fix and we're on a portion of the approach, we would follow the altitudes listed by the approach procedure. So in that case, we would, we could start down once we're, uh, you know, on a segment of the approach. So you always maintain the last assigned altitude until you're on a formal portion of the approach. All right, so going on to the next question. We got a figure here, so I'll bring that up. So it says, what is the minimum descent altitude and visibility criteria for the straight-in localizer DME runway 21 approach at Portland International? So we're looking for the minimum descent altitude and visibility criteria for a straight-in localizer DME runway 21. Is it 700 feet MSL and 1 nautical mile visibility, 700 feet MSL, 1 statute mile visibility, 1,200 feet MSL, and 1 statute mile visibility? I'm going to make your life a little easier here and just zoom right into the minimum section for the figure and give you a chance to answer that question. Okay, so a big thing to remember here is whenever you're dealing with FAA test questions, you want to find some reason to rule something out. So we can rule out C because C is 1,120 feet, and I don't see that referenced anywhere except for on the profile view. But it's not listed in the actual minimum section. So that would be a step down fix. The next thing, so really what they're asking here is, it's 700 feet for the straight in for 2-1, but they're asking is the visibility based on nautical miles or statute miles? And the answer to that is statute miles. So B is going to be the answer, and that's visibility as determined by the pilot. So we've got, this seems to be where most people made the error there, is it's visibility is based on statute miles. That's the same way with, with regular weather data, METAR reports, TAFs, all based on statute mile visibility. Okay, we will move on to the next question. Give you some time with this next one here. It says, flying clear of clouds on an instrument flight plan, what are the requirements for a contact approach to an airport that has an approved instrument approach procedure? The controller must determine that the pilot can see the airport at the altitude flown and can remain clear of clouds. Is it B, the pilot must request the approach, have at least 1 mile visibility, and be reasonably sure of remaining clear of clouds? Or C, the controller must have determined that the visibility was at least 1 mile and be reasonably sure that the pilot can remain clear of clouds. So which criteria has to be met for us to get a contact approach? Okay, so hopefully everybody selected an answer here. So just getting back to what we talked about earlier, a contact approach has to be requested by the pilot. Uh, and to be able to request it, you must have at least 1 mile visibility and be reasonably sure of remaining clear of clouds during the approach. So B would be the only one. The other ones mentioned the controller, and these are uh, pilot-initiated approaches. So good job, everybody got that one right. So let's go on to the next question. So we're going to be looking at figure 247. So referencing figure 247, it says, what type of entry is recommended for the missed approach holding pattern at Riverside Municipal Airport? Is it a teardrop, I'm sorry, a direct or teardrop, a parallel or teardrop, a teardrop or direct? And we're talking about the missed approach procedure. So I'm going to go ahead and zoom in on the profile view so you can get a better look at the missed approach procedure there. You can see the graphical description in the profile view and then a top-down look at it in the plan view. So I'm going to take some time with that question and see what you get. Dave and Pete, if you're feeling brave, you can always pop up your answers in the chat as well. No big deal if you don't. Okay, so thinking about this one here, if we remember our holding pattern, we've got the holding radial here, and then we would draw a line coming off of it. Oops. So we've got the holding radial, and we would draw a line coming off of it here for roughly our teardrop, parallel, and on this side would be direct. So whenever you're coming from the fixed end, which is the side with the holding pattern, and in this case you would be joining the 256 radial and taking it directly to the fix. So either teardrop or parallel would work. Which one you choose is technically based upon the heading you were flying when you approached it. So that's going to depend upon wind correction. So, if you were flying inbound to the station, with a crab angle, then that would call for you doing a parallel entry. If you were dealing with the wind coming from this direction, that would call for you doing a teardrop entry. In the real life, whichever one you choose to do is probably going to be okay. In a lot of ways, I prefer the teardrop entry over the parallel because that one's a little more cut and dry. If I have a choice, I can go out 30 degrees here, and I'm going away from the fix, so it makes it easier to intercept the course inbound. If you chose to do the parallel entry, you're going to come out here and you're only going to have a short time, depending on the winds, to join into that fix, the inbound radial. Let's see how we did there. So we did pretty good. Let's go ahead and move on to the next question. So we're looking at figure 114. Zoom in on that for you. And it says a pilot receives this ATC clearance. You are cleared to the ABC VORTAC, and you're asked to hold west on the 270 radial. What is the recommended procedure to enter the holding pattern? So we received clearance. We're told to hold west on the 270 radial. And using the HSI representation here, what hold entry would we be expected to do? Is it A, direct only, B, parallel or teardrop, or C, parallel only? So go ahead and take a moment with that question. Hopefully you guys are holding your thumb up to the screen. Okay, I'll go ahead and click the button here to see how you guys did. And then we'll go over it. All right, guys. So, this is one of the, it can be confusing to learn, but it's one of these tools that once you do learn it, it will honestly be your go-to method when you're in the airplane. So the idea here is that you don't have to pull up any scratch paper or do any kind of math to figure out what holding entry you're going to want to do. So you just have to mentally draw a couple lines onto your heading indicator. So if you're doing a right-hand turn, then this one would be considered right-hand turns because it doesn't mention left-hand turns or right-hand turns are standard. Then what you would want to do is you're going to mentally on your heading indicator draw a line starting in the using your right thumb. Oh, yeah, that's going to look right to you there. So you're going to go up 20 degrees and draw a line straight through, down 20, and then you're going to draw a line straight up. And that's going to help you divide out the different segments here. So the big piece of the pie, the one that looks like a letter D, is going to be your direct, parallel, and the small piece of the pie is always teardrop. Once you have that information, then all you got to do is identify where the holding radial is. In this case, the holding radial is the 270 radial. So we find the 270 radial down here, and we see that it's in the direct piece of the pie there. So if it's right-hand turns, you go up 20 and down 20, then a line straight up. If it happened to be left-hand turns, then you would just start from the left side and go up 20, down 20, and then still that line straight up. And the only big difference there is your teardrop and parallel get reversed for left-hand turns. Okay, let's go ahead and try the next one here and see what we got. So the question is, what timing procedure should be used when performing a holding pattern at a VOR. So A, timing for the outbound leg begins over or abeam the VOR, whichever occurs later. The timing for the inbound leg begins when initiating the turn inbound, and adjustments in timing of each pattern should be made on the inbound leg. Yeah, whenever, just to answer Carl's question there on the chat, when holding instructions are issued, if they do not mention a direction of turn, you assume right-hand turns. The only time they'll mention a direction typically is, for a left-hand turn hold. It's just kind of like, the opposite of VFR traffic patterns. We assume left-hand traffic unless it says otherwise. So the same thing with holding patterns is just the opposite because we do everything backwards apparently in IFR. So it's right-hand turns unless they say otherwise. So taking some time with this question, what timing procedures should be used when performing a holding pattern at a VOR? Timing for the outbound begins a beam, the VOR, which over or a beam, whichever comes later. Timing for the inbound leg begins when initiating the turn inbound. Adjustments in timing of each pattern should be made on the inbound leg. Let's see how you guys made out with this question here. All right. So the let's see, Carl's turn direction. Yeah. The I'm trying to figure out what you guys are talking about in the chat. So the entry procedure would be as necessary for the entry. You're right, Ian. Let's see. Now, on a lot of these questions, you got to look at what is the best answer. Some of the wording could be a little confusing, admittedly. Timing for the inbound leg begins when initiating the turn inbound. That's incorrect. It's once established on the inbound turn. And adjustments in timing for each pattern should be made on the inbound leg. That's incorrect because you are adjusting the outbound leg to achieve a 1 minute inbound leg. Here, we would typically start our outbound leg timing, beam the VOR on the outbound. So when we make the turn, the right-hand turn into the standard holding pattern, when the to from flag flips from a from back to a to, that means that you're abeam the station, and that's when you would want to start your outbound timing. Let's go ahead and go on to the next question here. So here we're looking at figure 114 again. Give you another shot at it. So a pilot receives this ATC clearance. Cleared to the ABC Vortec and hold south on the 180 radial. What is the recommended procedure to enter the holding pattern? Is it parallel, teardrop, or direct? So we're holding south on the 180 radial. Go ahead and take a minute with that. Okay, so looking at this one, let's see how we did. Hey, all right. So we draw our lines going up 20 and down 20 because it's a right-hand turn hold. And we draw a line straight up. And then we have our parallel, teardrop, or direct. 180 is over here in the teardrop section. So that would recommend a teardrop entry. So good job on that. Oh. Well, hey, this one looks like a lot of reading. All right. So which procedure should you follow if you experience two-way radio communications failure while holding at a holding fix with an expect further clearance time? The holding fix is not the same as the approach fix. So which procedure should you follow if you experience two-way radio communications failure while holding at a holding fix with an expect further clearance time? Is it A, proceed immediately to the approach fix and hold until the expect further clearance time? B, depart the holding fix to arrive at the approach fix as close as possible to the expect further clearance time? Or C, depart the holding fix at the expect further clearance time? So two-way radio communication, we are already holding at a holding fix, and we already have an expect further clearance time issued. So what procedure should we follow if we realize that we've lost two-way radio communication? All right, so the expect further clearance time is issued so that you have something to do in case you do lose two-way radio communications. It gives us a time to act. If we're getting close to the expect further clearance time within a minute or two and we haven't received any further clearance, we should be contacting ATC, and it may be at this time that we recognize that we have in fact lost two-way radio communications. And so if that's the case, you would plan to proceed on to your next action, which may be going to the initial fix for an approach, continuing on, whatever you were cleared or expected to do after, following your two-way radio communications. But the big thing here is that you should plan on departing the holding fix as close to the expect further clearance time as you can. So looks like everybody did a pretty good job on that. So you'd want to adjust that final leg in the holding pattern so that you depart the holding fix as close to the EFC time as possible. So good job on that one. Let's go to the next question. Here we're looking at figure 115. No, these are fun. Okay, so you received this ATC clearance. Hold west of the 1.5 DME fix on the 090 radial of the ABC Vortac. 5-mile legs, left turns. You arrive at the 15 DME fix on a heading of 350. Which holding pattern entry is correct? So are we going to be using holding pattern 1 or 2? This first thing is asking, and then the second thing is asking is what entry would you expect to do, direct or teardrop? So it's ridiculous. In the background, I got dogs barking, cats throwing up. I don't know what is going crazy. This quarantine times. So here the key thing is you got to visualize or draw out your arriving at the so you're holding on the 090 radial west of it of the 15 DME fix, 5-mile legs, left turns, and you arrive on a heading of 350. So first step would be to determine which holding pattern is appropriate. So looking at them, there's a couple different ways to look at the figure here and get some information from it. One is it's showing you the 15 DME fix, referenced by the orange arrow, and the top one's got a counterclockwise pattern, which would be left-hand turns, and it's got the arrows pointing towards the DME fix. The bottom one's got the arrow pointed towards the Vortac, it appears, and that would be left-hand turns looking at the Vortac is the way it kind of shows it there. In either case, it's a very poorly drawn figure, but if we look at them and we see the number 1 is the only one showing a left-hand turn referencing the actual fix, and it's west of the fix. So I'm going to go ahead and say that is number 1, which rules out letter A. And then if we arrive at a 350 radial, we're coming from the fix end, unprotected side. So boo-hoo, that would be a teardrop because we're not protected. Well, but apparently is direct because if we, this one you'd have to do the math. So you draw out the, if I draw out the holding pattern properly, it'll make it a little more obvious. So we've got the holding pattern coming through the fix here, and that's 90 degrees going that way, so this way is going to be 270. We draw a line, and this angle here is going to be 70. This angle here is going to be 110. And if we take our 90 plus 70, that gives us 160. And the reciprocal of 160 is going to be 340. So we're arriving at 350, which would be mean that we're pointing that direction, coming through the fix. So we are somewhere down over here. So it would in fact be a direct entry because we're arriving on a heading of 350. So that one was kind of close to call. So it did require you to kind of draw it out to confirm your answer. Using rules of thumb, I would have initially guessed teardrop, but by drawing it out, it does appears more correctly a direct entry recommendation there. So let's go ahead and go to the next one. So here we're referencing figure 158. And it says here, how should the missed approach point be identified when executing the RNAV runway 29 approach at Grand Junction Regional? Is it upon arrival at 5,340 feet on the glide path, when the to from indicator changes, or when time has expired for 5 nautical miles past the final approach fix? So what we're looking for is how to identify the missed approach point for the RNAV runway 29 approach at Grand Junction Regional here. So I'm going to go ahead and zoom in a little bit so we can see the plan view and profile view together there. Go ahead and take a moment with that one. So we want to know how to determine when we have reached the missed approach point. Which indication would we be looking for, A, B, or C? Okay, hopefully we have a moment to look at that one. Let's go ahead and check the answer out and see what we got. Okay, so most people are correct. The idea here is upon arrival at 5,340 feet on the glide path, so it does indicate a 3.13 degree glide path, and if you have a WAS capable GPS, you might get an indication of LNAV plus V, which means that it's going to derive a glide slope for you that you can follow down. That being said, this is a non-precision approach, so the 5,340 is only indicated here as a minimum descent altitude. It's an altitude we cannot go below. The way the GPSs are designed to be set up is that they, in normal navigation, they do what we call 2-2 navigation, which means that you're always navigating to a fix, and then after you cross that fix, you'll see the indicator flip to a from and then back to a to indication because it cycles to the next waypoint that you've assigned it to take you to. In the case of instrument approach, when you get to the missed approach point, the GPS is set up so that it stops cycling, which means that it will turn from a to indication to a from indication and stay in that from indication, and usually you'll go into another mode called a suspend mode. The idea of the suspend mode is that they want to ensure that you take care of any necessary climbs, and then when you're ready to navigate to your missed approach fix or holding point, you would just take it out of suspend mode, and then it would, the navigation cycle would start up again with it bringing up the missed approach procedure and hold for you. But they do stop cycling at the missed approach point. It will flip to a from indication and stay in a from indication until you tell it to go to your missed approach. So this one has, well, I didn't show it, but there's no timing indication on this approach procedure. Down there, it would be in the bottom left-hand corner of the airport diagram if timing was a function. But anytime there's a distance or a fixed point involved, there's as a missed approach point, and in the case of a GPS approach, is going to be the missed approach waypoint, which recall because it's circled as a flyover waypoint, so you have to fly over that before you do anything else. Let's go to the next one here. All right, so take a moment with this question. It says the glide slope and localizer are centered, but the airspeed is too fast. What should be adjusted initially? So if we're on the glide slope, things to think about here is our primary and supporting instrument references and primary control instruments for pitch, bank, and power. If we're on a glide slope, then our primary pitch reference is going to be the glide slope. So I'm going to take a moment and see if you can figure out which one they are. Are we going to be adjusting power only, pitch only, or pitch and power? So we noted that the airspeed is too fast. All right, let's see how we did with that one. Now, this is, I bring this one up here just because it's a question I've seen before, and it's, in my mind, is poorly worded to how we actually do things. The primary power reference while on a glide slope when we're on a constant rate descent is going to be the airspeed indicator. So airspeed being too high does indicate that we need to reduce power. But anytime we change airspeed, it is a two-step process. Reducing power, is also going to require a pitch element. There's going to be a pitch element involved after that as necessary to bleed off that airspeed. So I guess, more correctly worded, C could be shown as power and pitch. But in either case, they like to oversimplify things, I think, sometimes, and in this case they say power only. All right, let's go ahead and take a stab at this next question here. So it says if an early missed approach is initiated before reaching the missed approach point, the following procedures should be used unless otherwise cleared by air traffic control. Is it A, maintain altitude and continue past the missed approach point for 1 minute or 1 mile, whichever occurs first? Is it B, begin a climbing turn immediately and follow missed approach procedures? Or is it C, proceed to the missed approach point at or above the minimum descent altitude or decision height before executing a turning maneuver? So go ahead and take a moment with that question. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and select the answer here. So here we want to, proceed to the missed approach point. Looks like everybody did a good job on this question. Proceed to the missed approach point at or above our minimum altitude before we begin any turning. The idea here is, especially, if you're in a mountainous area, any early turning uh, can give you a problem with altitudes and terrain. Uh, if you lost all navigational indications and you had no way of knowing if you got to the missed approach point, you'd still want to immediately begin a climb, and you'd want to avoid any turns until you were higher than the minimum safe altitude. So good job on that one. Let's go on to the next question here. All right, so we got another figure here. 159. So if cleared for a straight-in localizer approach from over Hindi, the flight should A, land straight in on runway 3, begin final approach without making a procedure turn, comply with straight-in landing minimums. So I'm just going to zoom in a little bit more. If it's hard to see, I'll point out here's a Hindi intersection referencing this point right there. So we're cleared for straight in localizer approach from over Hindi. Should we land straight in on runway 3, begin final approach without making a procedure turn, comply with straight in landing minimums. So this one could be a little tricky as well. A clearance for an approach is not a clearance to land, so keep that in mind. If we're cleared straight in, that just implies that we are not to do a procedure turn. Is not a expectation of landing on runway 3. We could be potentially doing the localizer approach with the intent of circling to runway 21, in which case we would be following the circling minimums, not the straight in landing minimums. So that's the point there. The big deal is that you just don't, you would not be expected to do a procedure turn if you've been cleared straight in. Let's see how we did. All right, did pretty good there. Let's go ahead and try and look at the next question. So it says, if during a VFR practice instrument approach, radar approach control assigns an altitude or heading that will cause you to enter the clouds, what action should be taken? So we're doing VFR practice instrument approaches. Radar approach control assigns the altitude or heading that will cause us to enter clouds. What action should be taken? So it would be A, enter the clouds since ATC authorization for practice approaches is considered an IFR clearance. Would be B, avoid the clouds and inform ATC the altitude heading will not permit VFR. Or C, should we just abandon the approach altogether? Take a moment with that question. So the key phrase here in this question is VFR practice. So if we're asked to do something that would cause us to break a regulation, in this case while flying VFR, anytime you're given an instruction by ATC that you can't comply with, you need to advise them and get a new instruction. But you don't want to do anything crazy. So the best answer here would be B, to avoid the clouds and inform ATC that the altitude heading will not permit VFR. So good job on that one. All right, go ahead and pop up the next one. Go ahead and take a moment with that. So the question is, at what point are VOR and LNAV approaches terminated? At what point are VOR and LNAV approaches terminated? Is it A, the missed approach point, B, the decision altitude, or C, the minimum descent altitude? Okay, looking at this question here, so these approaches are both non-precision approaches. So they do have a minimum descent altitude. However, you just have to stay at or above that minimum descent altitude once you get down there, and then you need to continue flight to the missed approach point. So that's where the approach is terminated, at the missed approach point. Let's see how we did. So good job on that. B is incorrect because decision altitude references a precision approach with a glide slope. So that maybe be an LPV approach or an ILS approach. All right, let's move on to the next question. So during an instrument approach, under what conditions, if any, is a holding pattern course reversal not required? Is it A, none, since it is always mandatory? B, when radar vectors are provided? Or C, when cleared for the approach? The question is, under what conditions, if any, is a holding pattern course reversal not required? And take a moment with that one. Okay, so holding pattern course reversal. One is, A is not correct. You always want to be careful of absolutes. It is not always mandatory. And if you're cleared for the approach and you're coming from the side where the holding pattern is required, then C is not correct. So that only leaves A, or I'm sorry, B, when radar vectors are provided. So if you're getting vectors for the final approach course, even if you intercept the final approach course outside of the initial approach fix where the holding pattern is indicated, if you've been cleared for the approach based on radar vectors, then you do not have to do the course reversal. Looks like everybody did a pretty good job with that question. Let's go on to the next one. All right, so we got a figure for this one, figure 162. Zoom in on that for you here. Okay. So it says you are executing a night visual approach to runway 16 left at Eugene. As you approach the runway, you notice runway centerline lights are on. This indicates that A, you're too low on the approach, B, you've lined up on the wrong runway, or C, you're on the center line for your assigned runway. So the question is, as you approach your runway, we notice that the runway centerline lights are on. We're on approach, a night visual approach for runway 16 left. Zoom in on that for you there. Now, one of the things to keep in mind when you take your instrument written is that they don't send you to the legend. So the legend is up front in the testing supplement, and they don't reference that anywhere. You just need to know to go look there. But if you need to look up any symbology meanings or anything like that, you can go to the legend. But just looking at this symbol here, you can see that it doesn't have any centerline lights on 16 left. They're drawn on the airport symbol. And here it says for 16 right, you have the ALSF2, which the touchdown zone lighting. So that's a precision approach runway. Okay, moving on to the next question. What conditions are necessary before ATC can authorize a visual approach? So what conditions are necessary before ATC can authorize a visual approach? Is it A, you must have the preceding aircraft in sight and be able to remain in VFR weather conditions? B, must have the airport in sight or the preceding aircraft in sight and be able to proceed to and land in IFR conditions? Or C, must have the airport in sight or a preceding aircraft to be followed and be able to proceed to the airport in VFR conditions? You want the one that's most correct. Try to look out for anything that might cancel an answer out. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and click to see how we did there. All right. So good job there. Must have the airport in sight or preceding aircraft. And we have to be able to proceed to the airport in VFR conditions. That is correct. Good job. Let's go ahead and go on to the next question. So we got another figure here, figure 230. So it says the minimum safe altitude, MSA for the VOR DME or GPS alpha at 7 Delta 3 is geographically centered on what position? Is it White Cloud VOR DME, Deanne intersection, or Majub intersection? Let me go ahead and zoom in the plan view for you a little bit. Looking for the minimum safe altitude for that approach. What is it referencing, centered upon? Okay, so here we're looking for minimum safe or minimum sector altitude. That's referenced down here in this circle here. So we have 25 nautical mile radius around the HIC VOR DME. And if we look over here, we can see that that references the White Cloud VOR DME. So that should be answer A. Good job on that. Everybody got that one right? So here it says if all ILS components are operating and the required visual references are not established, the missed approach should be initiated upon A, arrival at the decision height on the glide slope, B, expiration of the time listed on the approach chart for missed approach, or C, arrival at the middle marker. When should we initiate the missed approach if we don't have our required visual references if they haven't been established? Okay, so looking at this question, we have we're doing an ILS approach, so that's it's got a glide slope. And if we're following a glide slope, then we're looking for a decision height. That's where we would initiate the missed approach. See how we did on that. So good job on everybody getting that one right. So B, time doesn't doesn't apply for an ILS approach. It would apply if you're doing a localizer approach where you're not using a glide slope, but then it becomes a non-precision approach. And the middle marker is typically located about 3,500 feet from the end of the runway, which is about where you can expect to be arriving at the decision height. But it's more of just a wake-up call to get you to look at your altimeter than a specific point to reference as far as when we need to execute the missed. So let's go on to the next question. Okay, we got a figure for this one, figure 188. Okay, so you have been cleared to the creek intersection via the BTG 054 radial at 7,000 feet. Approaching creek, you are cleared for the approach for the localizer DME runway 21 approach at Papa Delta X-ray, PDX. Descent to procedure turn altitude should not begin prior to completion of the procedure turn and established on the localizer. Should not begin prior to intercepting the glide slope. Should not begin prior to creek intersection outbound. So we are cleared to creek intersection via the BTG 054 radial assigned 7,000 feet. Approaching creek, we're cleared for the approach. When can we start down to our next altitude? So I'll just point out here's creek intersection right here, and here is the 054 radial on our way to creek intersection. Okay, so looking at this approach, it does have a transition route here, a feeder route that will take us from the Battleground VOR to Creek intersection where we can begin the approach. We would have to do the procedure turn. So once we arrived at Creek intersection, we would be making a left turn outbound, for approximately a minute or so. We'd make a left-hand turn to 344, go out for a minute, then make a turn away from the approach to 164 to come back and join the procedure inbound. The crux of the question here, though, is that you've been cleared for to the creek intersection via the BTG radial at 7,000 feet. So you always want to maintain last assigned altitude until you're on a portion of the approach. If they had cleared you via the battleground transition, then you could follow the altitude down to 5,700, but we'd have to maintain 7,000 as our last assigned altitude and stay at or above 7,000 until we cross creek intersection, at which time, looking at the profile view, we'd be able to begin down to 5,700 on the outbound. We have to stay at or above 5,700 on our way back inbound. And once we cross creek inbound, then we have a series of step-down fixes to take us down to the final approach fix. So this is a very complex approach. We got lots of different step-down fixes, so you have to be very careful, if you're using DME or GPS. The DME references the localizer, so you'd have to be dialed into the localizer on your DME equipment. So several step downs. This does have a visual descent point, and remember with those, even if you have those three things necessary to descend below MDA or decision altitude, it's the airport environment, position to make a normal landing, and our required flight visibility. Even if we have those three things, we cannot start down until we're beyond the visual descent point. But anyway, getting back to the question, the answer is that we should not begin descending prior to Creek intersection outbound. That's where we can start down to 5,700. All right, going on to the next question. We got figure 222. So you're cleared for the ILS runway 8 approach at Bob Hope Airport in Burbank, California. If you're over the Ventura VOR, you should do what here? Join the final approach course and fly the course reversal at Silex. Join the final approach course from the VTU 054 radio without flying the procedure turn. Or C, maintain 4,600 until reaching Silex, where you are expected to descend to the 3,700 in the holding pattern. So, we're cleared for the approach. And we are over the Ventura VOR. So here's the Ventura VOR. You'll see it is a initial approach fix. And I guess what it's asking then is if we are grabbing the approach from there, are we going to have to fly join the final approach course and fly this course reversal? Do we have to fly that or not? Maintain 4,600 until Silex, where you're expected to descend to the 3,700 in the holding pattern. Take a moment with that question and see how you interpret that. Okay, let's see how you guys did. All right, nice. So everybody that answered it got it right there. Because we're using that as an initial approach fix, it says here no PT, which means that we would not be expected to do the procedure turn. So we would just join this and start heading inbound. Once we join the localizer inbound, prior to Silex, we would be able to descend down to 4,000 or 3,700. This 4,000 here is referenced if we were using the holding procedure to get established inbound. So if we were, had been going direct to Silex, we'd have to stay, we'd be able to descend down to 4,000 while we're outbound, and then come down to 3,700 once we started inbound on the approach. But for our purposes, we're just going straight from the Ventura VOR right on to the localizer and going down to 3,700 until we hit Silex. After that, we can go down to 3,000 feet after Silex, which is, if we're doing the ILS, that's where we're going to catch our glide slope. It looks like we would actually be hitting the glide slope prior to getting to the outer marker here. If we're doing this as a localizer approach, we have to cross that outer marker at 3,000 feet. No higher, no lower. All right. So we've got one more question here. Let's see how we do. Got another figure here, figure 249. So the question, at what point is the pilot authorized to descend below 5,300 feet when cleared to the AJCIZ waypoint from the west. So we're cleared to that AJCIZ waypoint from the west. At one point, can we descend below 5,300? So this is the AJCIZ waypoint here that we're heading towards. So we're going to take a, coming from the west. So we're going to take a moment from that. Is it either 30 nautical miles from the waypoint, 15 nautical miles from that waypoint, or 15 nautical miles from the BEMXI waypoint? Okay, so doing a GPS approach, instead of a MSA, they use a TAA, which is our terminal arrival areas or zones here. So once you've been cleared for the approach, and you can see they're referencing the initial approach fix. If we're coming from the west, you can automatically start stepping down. So at 30 nautical miles, we can go down to 5,300. And at 15 nautical miles, we can go down to 4,700 if we're coming from the west. If we're coming from the east, when we're 30 miles out, we can go down to 4,700 here. So the answer would be, looks like B, 15 nautical miles. And there you go. So we had some confusion between the A and B. You know, at 30 nautical miles, we can go down to 5,300, but we have to be inside of 15 before we can go down to 4,700 if we're coming from the west. Yes. Make sure you look at the your direction of arrival, whether you're coming from the east or coming from the west. But it looks like we had a total group passing score of 76, so good job on that. Hopefully this was helpful to go through some of these questions. I tried to pick out some ones that I know I found confusing in the past. The students have had trouble with, so that we can kind of go over them in a little bit of detail. I'll, while we're tied up with all this, I'll be, adding more content. My plan for next week is to, normally I would demonstrate a IFR flight in class, so I'm going to try to see if I can make that happen. If not, I'll probably just put together another quiz that we can go through. It's always good to go through these questions and, I'll just, do a overall all category type of quiz, go over problem areas. But that's all I have for tonight. Thanks for joining me, and hope everybody's having a good time. Hopefully we'll be back flying sooner than later. But that's all I got for tonight. Thank you guys. You guys should get a quiz result in your email. It might take a little while before it shows up.